The transmission arrived on a Tuesday morning when Ambassador Chen Wei was drinking his third cup of coffee in the United Nations Space Command headquarters in Geneva. Switzerland. The message came through every quantum relay simultaneously and broadcast in 47 languages, including 3 that Earth's computers had never seen before. Watched the holographic display materialize above his desk and felt his heart rate spike out into the void and getting nothing but silence back. Being in the hologram was tall and crystalline, with light refracting through its body in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Greetings to the species designation, humanity. The being said in perfect Mandarin, which then shifted to English, then to Arabic, cycling through languages. You are hereby invited to participate in the Galactic Concordat Centennial Tournament, a gathering of all spacefaring civilizations, to demonstrate capability across combat strategy, technology, and diplomatic arts. Chen set his coffee down carefully because his hands were shaking. The tournament convenes in 6 Earth months at the Nexus Station orbiting Pulsar. J1748-22446 AD. The message continued. All species are welcome to send their finest representatives. This is your formal invitation to join the community of 847. Recognized civilizations. The hologram flickered and died. Chun sat in silence for exactly 30 seconds before he started making calls. By the end of the day, the entire United Earth government was in emergency session, and Commander Sarah Okonkwo was being pulled out of a training exercise in the asteroid belt where she'd been running combat drills with the 3rd Fleet. Sarah didn't want the job at first because she was a soldier, not a diplomat, and the last thing she wanted was to play nice with aliens who probably thought humanity was barely worth noticing. Said as much to Chen when they met in person at the lunar shipyards where Earth's diplomatic vessel was being hastily refitted for the journey. I don't need you to play nice, Chen told her while they watched engineers swarm over the ship's hull. I need you to win. Sarah looked at the older man with his gray hair and calm eyes and realized he understood exactly what this was. This wasn't a friendly meet and greet with the galactic neighbors. This was a test, and Earth needed to pass or be dismissed as irrelevant. What do we know about the other species? Sarah asked. Not much. Chen admitted. We've identified 17 species from the brief data packet they sent. The Kraliks are insectoid and militaristic. The Vexstar are crystalline and technologically advanced. The Elthani are telepathic and consider themselves the philosophical leaders of the Concordat, and they all think we're primitives. Sarah said. Chun smiled thinly. We've been in space for barely a century, and we're still using chemical rockets for basic transport. While they have faster-than-light travel and energy weapons, so yes, they think we're primitives. Good, Sarah said. Chun raised an eyebrow. People underestimate us all the time. Sarah continued. It's when they stop underestimating that you have to worry. The journey to the Nexus took 3 months, even with Earth's fastest ships, and Sarah used every day to prepare. She reviewed every scrap of information about alien species that Earth's long-range telescopes and radio arrays had collected over the decades. She studied military history from Sun Tzu to Clausewitz to the resource wars that had nearly destroyed Earth in the 22nd century. She trained with the Marine contingent assigned to the mission and pushed them harder than they'd ever been pushed before, because she knew whatever waited at the Nexus wouldn't care about their feelings when the Endurance finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel and the Nexus appeared on the view screens. Sarah understood for the first time how small Earth really was in the cosmic scale. The station was enormous beyond comprehension, built around a neutron star that pulsed with radiation every second like a cosmic heartbeat. Thousands of ships orbited the structure, from sleek, needle-shaped vessels to massive bioorganic craft that looked more grown than built. Endurance received docking coordinates, and Chen went to meet their official greeter while Sarah stayed on the bridge and watched the tactical displays there. Greeter was a Krolix named Shektar, who stood 8 feet tall on 4 legs with another 4 arms, ending in razor-sharp claws and mandibles that clicked with what Sarah's translator interpreted as contempt humanity. Shektar said the word like it tasted bad. You are late. All other species arrived weeks ago to prepare. We came as fast as we could, Chen said diplomatically. Yes, well, Shektar's mandibles clicked again. Your speed is not impressive. You are assigned to Docking Bay 747, which, as you may note, is the last bay in the sequence. Sarah stepped forward. Let me guess, we're also seated last in the tournament rankings. Shektar's compound eyes focused on her. You are ranked 847th out of 847 participants. This is based on objective assessment of your species' technological development, military capability, and cultural sophistication. Objective. Sarah repeated. Do you contest the ranking? Shektar asked, and there was definitely amusement in the clicking now. No. Sarah said, I just wanted to make sure everyone knows where we started, so when we finish, they'll understand how far we climbed. The opening ceremony was held in an amphitheater that could hold 1 million beings, and every seat was filled. Sarah sat with the human delegation in the section marked for the lowest tier species and tried not to feel small. The Concordat president was an ancient being called a Ecthrine that looked like floating energy contained in a vaguely humanoid shape. Welcome, competitors. The Threne's voice resonated in everyone's mind simultaneously. For 100 cycles we gather to celebrate the diversity and strength of our galactic community. Through contest we grow stronger. Through challenge we prove ourselves worthy. The crowd cheered in thousands of different ways, from roars to musical tones to patterns of light. Let the Centennial Tournament begin. The Thryn declared species after species was introduced with their achievements and strengths, highlighted the Vexstar. Crystalline Empire had mastered quantum mechanics 10,000 years ago. The Goroth military clans had never lost a war in their 3-million-year history. The Olthani telepathic collective could communicate instantaneously across light years. Then came humanity species designation humanity. The announcer's voice was notably less enthusiastic. Technological development, Tier 1 basic, military assessment, Tier 2 developing. Cultural sophistication, Tier 1 basic, notable achievements include successful colonization of their own moon and development of primitive faster-than-light capability within the last century. The amphitheater was silent for a moment then. Sarah heard it, laughter not from everyone, but from enough species that the message was clear. Humanity was a joke. And everyone knew. Itchin leaned close to Sarah. Are you angry? Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. No, I'm motivated. Good, Chen said. Because tomorrow the real work begins and I need you focused. Sarah looked out at the sea of alien faces, all of them convinced of humanity's inferiority. Shit. Thought about her grandmother who had survived the Lagos uprising, and her mother who had fought in the Martian Independence War, and all the humans throughout history who had been underestimated and dismissed and counted out. Then she thought about what happened to the people who made that mistake. Don't worry, Ambassador, Sarah said quietly. I'm very focused. The ceremony ended with fireworks that painted the neutron star's radiation in beautiful patterns. Sarah didn't watch the show. She was already planning for the first challenge and thinking about all the ways to make the galaxy regret underestimating humanity. The first challenge was announced at dawn, or what passed for dawn, on a station orbiting a neutron star, where time was measured in radiation pulses instead of solar cycles. Combat trials in zero gravity. Sarah stood in the briefing room with her team of 12 Marines, all of them veterans of conflicts on Earth and Mars in the Belt. The rules were simple. Teams of 12 fighting in a spherical arena, 300 meters in diameter with obstacles and no gravity. Victory came from either eliminating all opponents or capturing the central objective and holding it. For 60 seconds, weapons were restricted to mass drivers and kinetic systems because energy weapons tended to puncture station hulls, and nobody wanted to explain to the Concordat why they depressurized an entire sector. Were up against the Gorath in the first round, Lieutenant Morrison said, and Sarah could hear the tension in his voice. Gorath were four-armed giants who stood 9 feet tall and had evolved on a high-gravity world that made Earth look gentle. They wore powered armor that enhanced their already terrifying strength and carried weapons that could punch through ship hulls. Every simulation Earth had run gave humanity a 3% chance of victory. They outmass us, they outgun us, and they have twice as much combat experience as our entire species. Morrison continued. They also fight by a code. Sarah said. Everyone looked at her. I've been watching recordings of their previous tournament matches. Sarah pulled up a holographic display. They always start with a frontal assault because in their culture, honor demands facing your enemy directly. They break into 3 groups of 4, with a wedge formation and push toward the objective. Knowing what they'll do doesn't help if we can't stop them. Sergeant Kim pointed out. Sarah smiled. Who said anything about stopping them? The arena was packed with spectators from hundreds of species, all eager to watch the primitives from Earth get crushed by the legendary Goroth warrior Sira. And her team entered from one side, while the Goroth entered from the opposite end. The Goroth leader, whose name translated as War Master Krell, raised one massive arm in salute. Sarah returned the gesture, then activated her cum channel. Remember the plan, stick to it no matter what happens. The starting horn sounded. The Goroth launched themselves forward in perfect formation, just as Sarah had predicted, and their acceleration in zero gravity was terrifying. Sarah's team scattered, not in panic, but in a pattern they'd practiced for 3 days straight. The Goroth reached the central objective first, and probably thought they'd already won. Then the humans opened fire, not at the Goroth, but at the obstacles the arena was filled with. Debris fields and structural elements meant to provide cover. Sarah's team had spent hours studying the arena layout and identifying which obstacles were anchored and which were. Floating mass driver rounds slammed into a massive piece of debris, sending it spinning directly into the Goroth formation. Krell's warriors scattered to avoid being crushed, and suddenly their perfect formation was broken now. Sarah shouted. Her team moved in pairs, using the debris as cover and firing from angles. The Goroth weren't expecting. The Goroth were stronger, and their armor was better, but Sarah's team was faster, and they'd spent their entire military careers learning to fight in 3 dimensions. Earth's navies had been training in zero-G combat since the Belt Wars, while the Goroth, despite their experience, still thought in terms of up and down. Sergeant Kim and Corporal Okafor flanked a Goroth warrior and hit him from above and below simultaneously. Warrior shields flared and failed. Under the coordinated assault, one down. The Goroth adapted quickly because they hadn't survived 3 million years without learning. Krell reorganized his remaining fighters into a defensive sphere, protecting each other's backs. Classic defensive formation, Morrison said over the cum, which means they're thinking about defense, not offense. Sarah replied, push them. What followed was 7 minutes of the most intense combat Sarah had ever experienced. The humans couldn't win a direct fight, so they didn't fight directly. They used the environment, turning the arena itself into a weapon. They fired rounds that missed on purpose, but ricocheted off metal surfaces to hit from unexpected angles. They used their smaller size to hide in spaces the Goroth couldn't fit. They coordinated their attacks with a precision that came from growing up with radio communication, while the Goroth relied on hand signals and line of sight when the timer hit 0. Sarah's team had taken 5 casualties, but they controlled the central objective. The Goroth had 8 warriors left, but they were outside the capture zone. Victory. Humanity. The arena was silent for 3 full seconds. Then the crowd erupted, not in cheers but in shocked confusion, in the VIP observation box. The Vexstar ambassador flickered with patterns that indicated disbelief. How did the primitives defeat the Goroth? The Ulthoni observer, whose telepathy let her sense emotions across the arena, spoke quietly. They fought without honor, without pride. They fought only to win. Isn't that the point? Asked a younger delegate. For most species, combat is about proving superiority. The Ulthani explained. The Goroth fight to show their strength. The Krolix fight to demonstrate their ferocity. Even we, Ulthani, fight to prove our mental discipline. And the humans fight to survive, the Ulthani said. They don't care about looking strong or honorable. They care only about still being alive when it's over. The technology assessment came next, and this was where everyone expected Earth to fail completely. Species presented their most advanced weapon system. Vexstar brought a plasma cascade array that could superheat atmosphere into a self-sustaining fusion reaction. Krolix demonstrated a biological weapon that could adapt to any known immune system. Scardominion showed off a dark matter cannon that could punch through any shield by simply ignoring the laws of physics that shields relied on. Then came Earth's turn. Sarah wheeled out a device that looked embarrassingly simple compared to everything else. It was basically a long metal rail with magnetic coils and a power supply. This is a railgun, Sarah said to the judging panel. One of the Vexstar judges actually laughed which sounded like crystal chimes. You present a kinetic weapon? We abandoned such primitive technology 15,000 years ago. Would you like a demonstration? Sarah asked. The judges conferred and agreed with visible amusement. They selected a target, a derelict cargo ship in high orbit around the station. The ship was massive, easily 300 meters long, and built from standard commercial alloys. Team calibrated the railgun and loaded a projectile that weighed exactly 5 kilograms. It was a solid tungsten rod with no explosive, no guidance system, nothing fancy, just Masera fired. The projectile left the rail at 3% of light speed. That velocity, the tungsten rod had kinetic energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The cargo ship didn't explode, it vaporized. Instant it was there, the next it was an expanding cloud of superheated plasma the shockwave from the impact created. A debris field that spread outward and set off alarms across the entire station. Emergency shields activated to protect nearby vessels. Nexus Traffic Control had to reroute 24 ships to avoid the destruction, so I turned back to the judges, whose crystalline bodies were flickering and what the translation software identified as alarm, the advantage of kinetic weapons. Sarah said calmly, is that they're very simple, and you can't shield against them, because shields work by deflecting or absorbing energy. But this is just matter moving very fast, and matter doesn't care about your shields. That was incredibly dangerous. One judge protested. That was the point. Sarah replied, you wanted to see our most advanced weapon. I'm showing you what happens when you combine basic physics with enough power. The Concordat Weapons Committee spent 3 hours arguing about whether Earth's demonstration violated safety protocols. In the end, they ruled it was legal, but strongly discouraged humanity from doing it. Again, Earth's ranking jumped to 512. The diplomatic simulation was the third challenge, and this was where Chen finally got to demonstrate what he could do. The scenario was complex. For species were disputing resource rights to a mineral-rich asteroid field. Each species had legitimate historical claims. Each species needed the resources desperately. Each species was willing to go to war to get what they wanted. The simulation's AI played the 4 species, and participants had to negotiate a peaceful resolution. Most species approached it by advocating for one side or trying to force a compromise that gave everyone an equal share. Chun did something different. He spent the first hour just listening to each species explain their position, ask questions not about the resources, but about their cultures, their needs, their fears. Then he proposed a solution that shocked everyone. The Quellan need the heavy metals for their industrial expansion. Chen said the Pipit need the rare earths for their electronics manufacturing. The Mekonid colonies need the organic compounds for food production, and the Gorath need everything because they're running out of resources on their homeworlds. Yes, exactly. The AI moderator said, which is why compromise is impossible. Each species needs different things, but the asteroid field is a single resource. No, it isn't. Chen said, it's for different resources that happen to be in the same location. So we divide the field not by volume, but by composition. The Quellan get exclusive mining rights to iron and nick. The announcement of the survival crucible sent ripples of excitement through the tournament. This was the challenge everyone had been waiting for, because it separated the truly elite species from the pretenders. 1 month on a hostile planet designated as Crucible 7, where teams would compete for control points scattered across the surface. Planet was a nightmare by design. Toxic atmosphere, extreme temperature swings, aggressive native life forms in terrain that ranged from acid swamps to razor-sharp crystal forest teams could form alliances or fight alone. Most chose to fight alone. The Shkar, Dominion in particular, announced they would take no allies because they needed no help. Crushing lesser species, the Shka were apex predators, who stood 7 feet tall with midnight black scales, armored hide, and claws that could tear through steel. Their homeworld was a death world, where everything evolved to kill, and the Shkar had climbed to the top of the food chain through sheer vicious superiority. They'd won the last 3 survival crucibles, and their leader, a scarred veteran named Huntmaster Zathar, made it clear they intended to win this one too. The weak will fall, Zathar declared at the pre-deployment briefing. The strong will endure. This is the natural order. Sarah sat in the back of the briefing amphitheater and said nothing. She was too busy making notes about every species present and formulating A plan that would have made Machiavelli proud that evening she found. Chen in his quarters reviewing diplomatic reports. "I need you to set up meetings with 3 species," Sarah told him. The Quellan, the Pipit, and the Myconid. Chen looked up from his datapad. "Those are the 3 weakest species in the tournament. The Quellan are amphibious engineers who can barely fight. The Pipit are tiny and fragile, despite. They're excellent sensors, and the Myconid are fungal colonies that move at a glacial pace exactly." "Sarah said you want to ally with the weakest competitors," Chen said slowly. "I want to build a coalition," Sarah corrected. "The strong species will fight each other because they're all trying to prove they're the strongest, but the weak species, they just want to survive, and I can work with that." The Quellan delegation was skeptical at first. They were amphibious beings who stood 5 feet tall with smooth blue skin and large eyes. Adapted for underwater vision, their leader Kellanara listened to Sarah's proposal with obvious doubt. "You want us to ally with humanity even though you are also a weak species?" Kellanara asked. Sarah didn't take offense. "We're weak individually, but together we can be strong. The Quellan are excellent engineers, and you can build defensive structures in water, filtration systems that will be vital for long-term survival. And what do you offer in return?" "Protection and tactical expertise," Sarah said. "I've studied every survival crucible for the last 300 years, and I know what works and what doesn't. More importantly, I know how to fight species that are stronger than us." Kellanara's large eyes blinked slowly. "You have experience fighting superior opponents." "My entire military career has been about fighting superior opponents. I grew up during the resource wars on Earth, where corporate armies with better weapons and better armor tried to control our cities, and you know what? We beat them because we didn't fight fair, and we didn't fight honorably. We fought smart, and we fought mean." The Quellan agreed to the alliance. The Pipit were easier to convince. They were barely a foot tall with large eyes and delicate bodies, but their sensory organs could detect electromagnetic radiation across spectrums that most species couldn't even imagine there. Representative Kaikri was blunt. "We die first in every combat scenario. Our bodies are weak, and we have no natural defenses, which is why you need allies." Sarah said, "Your sensors can detect threats before anyone else sees them, and that's valuable. You watch our backs and warn us what's coming, and we make sure nothing gets close enough to hurt you." Kikri agreed immediately. The Myconid were the strangest of the 3. They weren't individuals, but colonies of fungal organisms that formed a collective consciousness. Their spokesperson was a mass of pale mushrooms arranged vaguely like a humanoid, and it communicated through chemical signals. "That took several seconds to translate. Why ally with us?" the Myconid asked. "We are slow, we cannot fight, we offer nothing, you offer environmental adaptation," Sarah countered. "Myconid colonies can survive in almost any condition, and you can spread spores that other species can't detect. That's camouflage, that's reconnaissance. That's area denial if we need it." The Myconid considered this for a long time. Finally it agreed when the dropships descended to crucibles. Evan, the alliance consisted of 4 species and 52 individuals total. The Shkar Dominion hit the ground with 30 elite hunters and immediately began racking up kills. Other powerful species like the Goroth and the Kraliks established strong positions and started fighting each other for the most valuable control points. Sarah's alliance did something different. They landed in a remote region far from the major control points and immediately started building. The Quellan constructed a fortified base using local materials and their engineering expertise. The Pipit set up a sensor network that covered kilometers in all directions. The Myconid spread spores throughout the surrounding area, creating both camouflage and an early warning system. Sarah and her human Marines trained everyone in guerrilla tactics. The strong species are fighting over the high-value targets, Sarah explained to her allies. "Let them fight. Let them weaken each other while we quietly accumulate the low-value control points that nobody else wants." Alanara looked at the tactical display. "But the low-value points give fewer points. Points don't matter if you're dead," Sarah replied. "We're playing the long game for 2 weeks. The strategy worked perfectly while the Shkar Dominion and other apex predators slaughtered each other in brutal combat over the major control points. Sarah's alliance methodically captured and held dozens of minor locations. They avoided fights they couldn't win. They used the pipette sensors to detect threats early and relocate before superior forces arrived. They employed myconid spores to hide their bases from. Aerial reconnaissance. The scoreboard showed Sarah's alliance accumulating steady points, while the stronger species bled themselves. Fighting each other by the end of week 3, they controlled 40% of all control points. The Scar Dominion notice, said Huntmaster Exitar, reviewed the tactical situation and felt something close to rage. Weak species, the pathetic coalition that should have been easy. Prey controlled more territory than his elite hunters. This is unacceptable. Scythar hissed. We hunt them now. The Shka were the perfect hunters. They had thermal vision that could detect body heat through solid rock. They could run at speeds that would exhaust most species in minutes and maintain that pace for hours there. Pack tactics were honed over millions of years of evolution. It eliminated 17 other species from the crucible, and now they turned their attention to the human. Lion Sarah knew they were coming 3 hours before they arrived because the pipette sensors detected the Shkar thermal signatures moving through the crystal forest they're trying to surround us. Kaikri reported. 30 hunters moving in a classic encirclement pattern. Sarah looked at her tactical map and felt a cold smile spread across her face. Good. She said, good? Kellanara looked at her in alarm. They are the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. How is this good? Because I've been studying them, Sarah replied. I know exactly how they hunt, and that means I know exactly how to kill them. Sarah had spent weeks reviewing every second of footage from the Scar's previous Crucible victories. She knew they relied on thermal vision for tracking. She knew they used intimidation and fear to break their preys. Cohesion. She knew they always attacked at dawn when most species were sluggish most. Importantly, she knew they'd never faced an enemy who understood psychological warfare. Here's what we're going to do. Sarah gathered her allies. Myconid will create heat decoys using controlled spore combustion to mimic our thermal signatures. The pipette will identify the exact moment the Shkar commit to their attack vector. The Quellin will have prepared firing positions and locations the Shkar think are empty, and my Marines will handle the actual killing. What about us? Asked a myconid. You're going to do something the Shkar have never experienced. Sarah said, you're going to make them afraid. The Shkar attacked at dawn as predicted. They moved through the crystal forest with absolute confidence because they'd studied the human base and knew exactly where their prey was sleeping. Zotha led the primary assault group, while 2 flanking elements moved to cut off escape routes. They detected thermal signatures in the base and accelerated their approach. Then the thermal signatures exploded. The myconid had created spore clusters that burned hot enough to mimic human body heat, and when the Shkar got close, Sarah detonated them remotely. The explosions didn't hurt the armored Shkar, but they did blind their thermal vision temporarily, which was when the real attack began. The Quellin had spent a week building hidden firing positions in the crystal formations. They opened fire from angles that Shkar never expected because predators don't expect prey to ambush them. Mass driver rounds slammed into Shkar warriors from above, and behind 3 hunters went down, and the first Volagzathor roared in fury and tried to regroup. But Sarah had one more surprise. The myconid had recorded Shkar death screams from previous Crucible footage. The final challenge was announced with appropriate ceremony and gravitas, because this was what separated the truly elite civilizations from everyone else, the grand strategic simulation. Every species would face the same crisis scenario, a galaxy-wide catastrophe involving simultaneous economic collapse, plague, outbreak, and invasion by extragalactic forces. Simulation was brutally complex, with millions of variables and interconnected systems. Most species would fail, and everyone knew it. The simulation began at midnight station time, and each species was given a private command center with access to all the simulated data they could possibly need. Sarah and Chen sat in Earth's command center, surrounded by economic advisors, medical experts, and military strategists. The scenario loaded, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. Economic collapse started in the galactic core, where the primary trade networks failed due to a quantum currency destabilization within simulated weeks. The collapse spread outward, destroying markets and creating resource shortages across hundreds of systems. Simultaneously, a plague emerged on 17 worlds. The out disease was unlike anything in the Concordat's medical databases, and it spread through both biological and synthetic species, which shouldn't have been possible. Mortality rate was 40% and climbing, and then the invasion began. Extragalactic forces, later identified as von Neumann probes, began entering Concordat space from multiple vectors. Didn't communicate, and they didn't negotiate. They simply consumed everything to build more of themselves. Most species approached the simulation methodically. The Vexstar focused their entire effort on solving the plague because they were the most technologically advanced and they believed a cure would stabilize everything else. They developed an elegant solution involving quantum medical nanites that could adapt to any biological or synthetic substrate. Was brilliant, and it would have worked, except they ignored the economic collapse and the invasion. By the time they cured the plague in the simulation, their entire civilization had fallen apart from resource shortages, and half their systems were consumed by von Neumann probes. The Goroth took the opposite approach. They marshaled their legendary military might and threw everything at the invasion there. Simulated fleets fought with unmatched courage and skill. They destroyed wave after wave of von Neumann probes, but they ignored the plague and the economic collapse. Billions died in their simulation from disease and starvation, while their warriors fought glorious battles in space. The Althani tried to use their diplomatic and telepathic abilities to coordinate a galactic response. They created efficient communication networks and psychological support systems to prevent panic. Was impressively organized, but it didn't actually solve any of the three crises there. Simulation ended with everyone calmly and efficiently. Diansara watched the other species fail one by one and felt a strange sense of familiarity. This scenario, she said quietly. It's Earth's history. Chen looked at her. The economic collapse is like the Great Depression and the Eurasian market crash of 2089. Sarah continued. The plague is every pandemic we've ever faced, from the Black Death to COVID-47. The invasion is every war where we faced an enemy that seemed unstoppable. We've survived all of this before. Chen said slowly, not separately. Sarah corrected all at once. The resource wars hit when we were already dealing with the Martian plague and economic instability and corporate armies trying to seize control of Earth's remaining resources. Chen pulled up Earth's strategic file. So we don't specialize, we do everything simultaneously badly, Sarah added. We do everything badly, but we do all of it at the same time. The human team split into three groups. The medical group didn't try to create an elegant cure for the plague. Instead, they implemented quarantine protocols learned from centuries of pandemic response. They isolated infected populations using methods that were crude but effective. They developed treatments that didn't cure the disease, reduced mortality from 40% to 20%. Wasn't as sophisticated as the Vexstar nanite solution, but it worked across all affected systems simultaneously. The economic team didn't try to restore the galactic currency. Instead, they implemented local barter systems. In resource-sharing networks, they created emergency supply chains using whatever ships and infrastructure still functioned. They prioritized critical resources like food, medicine, and fuel. It was messy and inefficient, but it kept people alive. Military team didn't try to win glorious victories against the von Neumann probes. Instead, they implemented scorched earth tactics. They abandoned systems that couldn't be defended and destroyed everything useful before retreating. They used the probes' own replication protocols against them by seeding false resource deposits laced with corrupted code. They fought dirty using suicide attacks, false surrenders, and biological warfare against machines that couldn't even be killed in the traditional sense. It was brutal and ruthless, and it worked 12 hours into the simulation. Earth's approach started showing results. The mortality rate was still high, but it was manageable. The economy was in shambles, but people weren't starving. The invasion was costly, but the defensive lines were holding by. R24, the simulation showed humanity's solution actually stabilizing the crisis. Judges watched in growing amazement. They're not solving anything optimally, observed a Vexstar official. Their plague treatment is crude, their economic system is inefficient, and their military tactics are barbaric, but it's working. The Althani head judge replied, "Everything is working together at hour 36. Ambassador Chen was called to present Earth's final analysis to the judging committee, stood before the assembled representatives of the galaxy's greatest civilizations, and took a deep breath. You look at our solution and see failure. Chen began, "You see medical treatments that aren't as good as the Vexter could create. You see economic systems that aren't as efficient as the Krolix could manage. You see military tactics that aren't as honorable as the Gorath would employ." The judges waited, "But you're missing the point," Chen continued. "This simulation isn't about being the best at one thing. It's about surviving when everything goes wrong at once. And that's something humanity has more experience with than any species in this galaxy." Chen pulled up Earth's history images, flowed across the holographic display. Wars, plagues, famines, natural disasters, nuclear strikes, biological weapons, economic collapses. You evolved on worlds where you faced one major threat and developed one major solution. Chen said the Vexter faced technological challenges, so you became masters of technology. The Gorath faced military threats, so you became perfect warriors. The Althoni faced social chaos, so you developed telepathic unity. But Earth... Chen's voice grew harder. "Earth tried to kill us in every way possible. We faced wars that killed billions, plagues that wiped out continents, economic collapses that destroyed civilizations. We poisoned our own air, burned our forests, and nearly made our planet uninhabitable. And you survived through luck." A Krolix judge interjected. "No," Chen said flatly. "We survived through adaptation. When war threatened us, we learned to fight. When plague came, we learned medicine. When we starved, we learned to share. When we destroyed our environment, we learned to rebuild." Chen gestured to the simulation results. "You look at our history and see primitive warfare and suffering and chaos. We look at it and see our greatest teacher, every disaster you can imagine we've faced and survived." Chen continued, "Not because we were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because we adapted and we learned and we never gave up." The amphitheater was silent. The Vexstar created a beautiful cure. "It would have saved everyone if you'd had time to implement it," Chen said. "But you didn't have time because you ignored everything else. The Gorath fought with incredible bravery and honor." Chen continued. "But billions died of plague while you were being honorable. The Althoni coordinated everything perfectly." Chen finished, "But coordination without action is just organized failure." Chen looked each judge in the eye. "Humanity survived this crisis in the simulation because we've survived it before in reality. We know that sometimes you can't save everyone, so you save who you can. We know that sometimes the elegant solution takes too long, so you use the crude one that works now. We know that sometimes honor and rules and protocols have to take a back seat to survival." He paused. "You invited us to this tournament to measure our capabilities," Chen said quietly. "You wanted to know what humanity could contribute to the galactic community? Here's your answer. We're the species that knows how to survive the unsurvivable because we've been doing it for our entire existence." The final rankings were posted 6 hours later. First place, Threen Collective, an ancient species that had been navigating galactic politics for millions of years. Second place, Vexstar Crystalline Empire, masters of technology and science. Third place, humanity. Announcement sent shockwaves through the Concordate. Species barely a century into space travel, ranking above civilizations millions of years old. Gorath, who had placed 7th, were furious. The Shkar, who had dropped to 43rd place after their defeat in the Crucible, demanded a recount, but the Thryn Collective did something unprecedented. The president, herself a being of pure energy who had existed for longer than Earth had been habitable, appeared in Earth's command center. The closing ceremony was magnificent. 147 species gathered in the grand amphitheater to celebrate the tournament's conclusion. Fireworks painted the neutron star's radiation in impossible colors. Musical performances from a dozen species created harmonies that human ears had never imagined. Ambassador Chen stood on the stage accepting Earth's third-place trophy, while cameras broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Sarah stood beside him, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in her gut that something was wrong. The feeling proved correct. Exactly 14 minutes into the ceremony, every alarm in the Nexus station started screaming. Simultaneously, The celebration stopped instantly. The Thrine president materialized. In the center of the amphitheater, and her energy form flickered with what could only be panic, all species representatives report to the emergency command. At center immediately. Her voice resonated in everyone's minds. This is not a drill. The command center was chaos. Hundreds of officials from every major species crowded around holographic displays, showing the same terrifying data. Sarah pushed through the crowd until she could see the main display and felt her blood run cold. Von Neumann probed thousands of them pouring into Concordat space from 17 different vectors. The long-range sensors had detected them 3 weeks ago, but the Concordat Council had kept it quiet to avoid panic during the tournament. Why didn't you tell us? Demanded a Gorth general. Because we believed we had time, the Thrine president admitted. Our projections suggested they wouldn't reach inhabited space for at least 6 months. Your projections were wrong, Sarah said flatly. Everyone turned to look at her. Sarah pointed to the tactical display. These aren't random probes, they're coordinated. Look at the entry vectors. They're designed to bracket our defensive positions and cut off retreat routes. Her Vexstar admiral flickered with indignation. The probes are merely machines. They cannot strategize. Maybe they couldn't when they started, Sarah replied, but they've been replicating and evolving for who knows how long. Every time they consume a ship or a station, they acquire new technology, new data, new capabilities. The Althoni head judge spoke quietly. We ran simulations. The best-case scenario shows 73% probability of complete galactic sterilization within 5 years. The command center erupted in panic. Species representatives shouted over each other, proposing strategies, debating tactics, arguing about resources. Sarah listened for 30 seconds, then she'd had enough. Quiet. Her voice cut through the chaos with parade ground authority. The command center fell silent. How many ships does the Concordat have available for immediate deployment? Sarah asked. Krolik's logistics officer checked his displays. Approximately 40,000 vessels of various classes spread across 800 star systems. How many von Neumann probes have we detected? Sarah continued. Current count is 12,000, but that number increases by roughly 3% every hour as they replicate, the sensor technician replied. So we have numerical superiority right now, Sarah said. But in 72 hours, they'll match our numbers, and in a week, they'll outnumber us. We need to destroy them before they can replicate further, suggested a Gorth admiral. Tried that, Sarah replied. Look at the combat data from the first engagements. She pulled up recordings from the 3 skirmishes that had already occurred. Concordat ships had engaged probe clusters. Using standard military tactics, the probes had adapted. Within minutes, energy weapons that worked in the first volley were absorbed and converted to power by the second. Kinetic weapons that destroyed probes in one location were anticipated and dodged in the next. They learn, Sarah said. Every attack teaches them how to defend. Every defense teaches them how to attack. Then we're doomed, whispered a young delegate. No. Chen spoke up. We just need to fight smarter, not harder. The Thrine president turned to him. What do you propose, Ambassador? Chen looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at the tactical display and started calculating. We need 3 things immediately, Sarah said. First, total operational command of all Concordat military forces. Second, unrestricted access to all available resources and manufacturing capability. Third, explicit authorization to employ any tactics necessary for victory without restriction. The command center erupted again. You want us to hand control of the entire Concordat military to a species barely a century old? Our Vexstar admiral demanded. Yes, Sarah said flatly. This is insane. A Krolik's general protested. This is necessary. The Althoni judge said quietly. Everyone turned to her. I have been observing humanity throughout this tournament, Judge continued. I have watched them fight and strategize and survive. Every other species in this room fights according to rules and traditions and honor. She paused. Humanity fights to win, and right now, that's exactly what we need. But their tactics are brutal, protested a delegate. Yes, they are, the judge agreed. Which is why they'll work against an enemy that has no concept of mercy or negotiation. The Thrine president was silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. The Concordat Security Council will vote. The vote took 3 minutes for members voted. Yesto voted. Noon abstained. Commander Okonkwo, the Thrine president said formally. You are hereby granted full operational authority over all Concordat military forces effective immediately. May whatever gods you believe in have mercy on us all. Sarah didn't waste time celebrating. I need detailed schematics of every ship class in the Concordat Navy, tactical data on all previous engagements with the probes, and a direct communication line to every fleet commander. Sarah began issuing orders. I also need metallurgical data on the probe composition and access to the Concordat's manufacturing network. Within an hour, Sarah had assembled what she called the War Council. It consisted of military experts from 17 species engineers, from 30 economic planners, from a dozen more, and Chen to handle the political aspects. Here's the situation. Sarah addressed the council. We can't outfight the probes because they adapt too quickly. We can't outproduce them because they replicate exponentially. We can't outlast them because they don't need food or rest or morale. So how do we win? Asked a Quellan engineer. Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. We cheat. Sarah's plan was horrifying in its scope and ruthlessness. Phase 1, Scorched Earth. We evacuate every system in the probe's projected path. Sarah explained, but before we leave, we destroy everything useful. Every mining station, every shipyard, every fuel depot, we render them completely worthless. That will cripple our own economy. A Vexstar economist protested, better crippled than extinct. Sarah replied coldly. Phase 2. False flags. We seed false resource deposits in strategically worthless locations. Sarah continued. Rich mineral readings, energy signatures, everything that would attract the probes. But when they arrive to harvest those resources, they'll find bombs. What kind of bombs? Asked a weapons specialist. Every kind, Sarah said. Nuclear, antimatter, quantum singularity. I don't care as long as it destroys probes. Phase 3. Viral corruption. We let the probes capture some of our ships. Sarah said, and the room erupted in protest. You want to give them our technology? Krolik's admiral shouted. I want to give them poisoned technology. Sarah corrected. We'll seed captured ships with corrupted code that looks like useful data, but actually introduces errors into their replication protocols. The more they copy it, the more unstable they become. Phase 4. Asymmetric warfare. We don't engage them in fleet battles where they can adapt. Sarah explained. We hit them with single ship attacks, suicide runs, and unconventional weapons. We use biological agents that corrode their hull materials. We use psychological warfare even though they're machines, because they're tactical algorithms. Still respond to threat assessment. The War Council sat in stunned silence. Finally, the Ulthoni judge spoke. What you're describing isn't war, it's systematic genocide. No, Sarah corrected quietly. Genocide is what happens if we lose. This is survival. And I know it's ugly, and I know it violates every principle of honorable warfare, but right now I don't care about honor. I care about making sure every species in this room still exists a year from now. Chen stood beside her. The probes won't show mercy. They won't negotiate, and they won't stop until they've consumed everything. So we fight them with every tool we have, no matter how ugly, because the alternative is extinction. The Threne president spoke. Implement the plan. The next 72 hours were the most intense of Sarah's life. Coordinated evacuation of 17 star systems. She oversaw the deployment of 3,000 false resource deposits. She personally selected which ships would be seeded. With viral code and sacrifice to the probes, she didn't sleep, and she barely chunned. Brought her food and coffee and tactical updates. The first false deposits triggered. He reported on R-47, destroyed approximately 800 probes. Good, Sarah said without looking up from her tactical displays. What about the viral corruption? Too early to tell, but sensor data suggests some probe clusters are showing erratic behavior. Keep monitoring it. By R-96, the results started showing the probe replication rate had slowed from 3% per hour to 1% probe. Casualties were mounting faster than they could reproduce. The defensive lines were holding. Sarah allowed herself 5 minutes to feel relieved then.
Oh.
The probes adapted. New clusters emerged with different tactics.